You're listening to Milwaukee Mafia, your podcast dose of Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Milwaukee Mafia. I'm Eric Walterkins.
I'm Gavin Schmitt.
And Gavin, do you have anything to banter about for a little bit before we start the episode, or should we just get right into it?
Gosh, I don't know that I do. We might just have to get right into it.
All right, well.
Are you have anything?
I don't have anything.
Well, then let's do it.
So, all right, what do you got for us?
Okay, so this time we're going to talk about Ralph Capone.
Really?
Yeah.
No relation to Al Capone?
Oh, totally related.
No, okay.
Totally related. So, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. Much has been written on Al Capone, but this is not about him.
Wonderful start.
Yeah. He had numerous interesting siblings, and one of them has a connection to Wisconsin. That's his brother Ralph, sometimes known as Bottles, although no one seems to agree why they called him Bottles.
I was just going to ask, do we know why they called him Bottles?
There's different theories put forward, but I'm not even sure if anybody even called him Bottles or just the newspaper called him Bottles, because that's a stupid nickname. Ralph was born January 12th, 1894, which that makes him the older brother of Al. Their parents were Gabriel and Teresa. Some say that Ralph was born in one city. Others say he was born in a different city. But either way, everybody agrees he was born in Salerno, the province of Salerno in Italy, which is not Sicily, to be clear. He is not Sicilian.
Which we've talked about that before. I believe that
Right.
Al Capone wasn't Sicilian either.
Ralph arrived in America with his mother in 1895, so he was just a baby. He lived in Brooklyn. He attended the public schools there, but he dropped out after the 6th grade. And he went to work as a messenger boy. Pretty exciting stuff.
So, based on what you just said, was Al Capone was not born in Italy at all? He was born here. Okay.
Well, not here, but he was born in America, yeah.
He wasn't born in our podcast studio?
No. He was born in this room. This very room. In 1915, Ralph married Florence. They had one child together, also named Ralph. At that time, they still lived in Brooklyn, and Ralph Sr. worked as a paper cutter. He apparently worked there for about 5 years, and then he sold insurance, of all things. But the couple did not get along very well, and according to Ralph, she took little interest in their child, she took little interest in their home, she didn't cook, she didn't clean, and she was a terrible wife. One day, she left their son with some neighbors, and she abandoned the family completely. Ralph sued for divorce, he was granted the divorce, and his mother was given custody of Ralph Jr., so the grandmother is raising Ralph Jr.
This is a really dumb question.
Yeah.
But you say sue for divorce?
Yeah.
Do we still do that today?
Technically, yes.
Okay.
I don't think we phrase it that way.
But it's still the same process. It's just they said back then suing. Okay.
Right. So Ralph went to Chicago to join his brother Al in February 1922. His first job was tending bar at a roadhouse. He and Al and some other guys shared an apartment. Ralph later claimed that he went into the beer business independent of his brother. He said, no, this was my idea. I'm not working for Al. But not many people believed him, especially because he continued to live with his brother for most of the time he was in Chicago. So they were pretty close. When machine gunners from the north side of Chicago fired at his car, it was driven by his chauffeur, Sylvester Barton. Police believed that they mistook Ralph for his brother. Others believed it was a warning. Barton, the chauffeur, was slightly injured when a bullet grazed him. So you don't want to be a chauffeur to the Capones.
So I take it at this point in time, where we're at right now, Capone was pretty well known for his mafia stuff.
Yeah, he got pretty big pretty fast, and there were a lot of different groups in Chicago. Like, he didn't have the whole city. There were, maybe 5 different gangs or something. But yes, he definitely was a powerful force. After the squeaky clean William Deaver became mayor of Chicago, John Torrio, who was Al Capone's mentor, and the Capone family moved out to the suburb of Cicero. They said, we don't want to live in Chicago anymore. They're cleaning up the streets here. We want to live in a crappy city. So we moved to Cicero. Ralph gets stopped for carrying a concealed weapon. He pays to get out and it gets dropped. He's later charged with voter fraud. So, that's cool. But that gets dropped. At another time, he's arrested at a soft drink parlor, which I have in quotes here. He was found in the back room with an attractive blonde woman. And him, his friend, and the blonde woman were charged with disorderly conduct. What they were doing to get disorderly conduct, I don't know. The newspaper does not say.
We'll leave that up to your imagination.
Yes, Ralph was additionally charged with vagrancy, and his friend was carrying a concealed weapon.
Remind me again, what is vagrancy?
Vagrancy is it's basically a made-up charge, where if they stop you and they ask you, what's your business being here? If you don't have a good answer, they arrest you.
Okay, I remember talking about that in a previous episode as well.
It's most cities it's not legal anymore, but that used to be a common way to pick up suspicious people. He was picked up for vagrancy another time. For a while, he was in Memphis, Tennessee, because he was there for some racehorse business. They picked him up there as part of an investigation. What they asked him, I don't know. I imagine they just going to question about any random thing because they saw Ralph Capone in town.
So at this point in time, was Ralph known to be up to no good, or was he just getting picked up because he was Al Capone's brother?
Well, there's some debate about that, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But yeah, I think he probably was more well known for being Al's brother. I don't think he was quite as bad as it would seem. It's just,
I mean, you did say, though, that he did get picked up for carrying a concealed weapon.
Yeah,
so he was packing, so that...
He was, yeah.
That would suggest that he wasn't just a, run-of-the-mill kind of guy. Unless maybe...
But if people are shooting at you, you got to have...
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. All right. In 1928, he marries his second wife. Her name is Velma, which is an awesome name. Ralph is arrested with 4 of his henchmen at the newly reopened Colosimo's Club. They are caught tossing their pistols under the table as police walk in, but the charges are later dismissed. He was caught a few more times carrying guns, but every time he beats the rap. You're not supposed to have a concealed weapon, but everybody does it. In October 1929, Ralph is charged in Chicago for the worst crime imaginable.
What is the worst crime imaginable?
He doesn't pay his taxes.
Oh, yeah. That low life.
Yeah, bank records showed that he had deposited $1.8 million in a bank account over 5 years. The government said, hey, that means you owe us $300,000 in taxes. But Ralph claimed he was broke. And he goes, instead of $300,000, how about I pay you $1,000? And the government says, no. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in prison as well as a $10,000 fine. After he was sentenced, he told the press, I can't understand it. How did they get me? He appealed the conviction, so he remained free for a while.
Based on the amount of money he has deposited over that period of time, I'm going to guess he was into something.
Yeah.
So,
in May 1930, while he's out waiting for his case to be appealed, 2 clubs in Cicero that are believed to be owned by Ralph are raided: the Cotton Club and the Greyhound Inn. They had warrants for Ralph and 3 others, but the wanted men were not found. The other men were Art Goldie, Mike Allegretti, known as Bon Bon, and a man who they didn't know his name, but he went by the nickname Rasputin, which is a pretty sweet name.
Yeah.
Much better than Bottles. The employees that were there were arrested, but none of them were notable and more or less released.
And did you say what they were going after these guys for?
I'm about to.
Okay.
The government alleged that Ralph was flying in booze from Windsor, Canada, 6 days a week in a plane. Ralph denied that he owned the clubs, but the judge said, well, we think you do, but either way, we're going to close them down. So he ordered them closed for being a public nuisance. So yes, this is Prohibition times, and you cannot be flying in booze from Canada to sell at your club. There's a whole lot of not okay parts of that.
And I take it during Prohibition, was it still completely legal in Canada?
No.
That just happened to be where he was sourcing it from. Then.
Well, we've probably talked about this, but it's because you asked, it's a good refresher. There was Prohibition in the United States, and there was Prohibition in Canada. And they didn't have the exact same rules, and they didn't happen at exactly the same time, but they were very similar in a lot of ways. But there's a big loophole in the Canadian Prohibition, and that's that you can't sell booze to Canadians because that's not legal, it's Prohibition, but they didn't shut down the breweries because the breweries were still allowed to export to Europe or whoever else wanted the booze. So there's some big breweries and distilleries in Canada, like Seagram's is in Canada. And so this is the thing, like, it was perfectly legal for a Canadian company to sell to Americans, even though Americans were not legally allowed to buy booze.
So it was the Americans that were the only ones breaking the law,
right,
by all technicalities.
Right. If you were an American and you showed up at Seagram's and you said, give me a bunch of cases of Seagram 7, the Canadians could totally do it. If you had an American passport or driver's license or whatever, totally legal for them. But you can't be bringing that into the U.S. That's a big no-no.
So they can sell it. How do you know? Did they have a method of controlling this where they just didn't start consuming it in Canada, or was it just? I
don't.
Okay.
I know practically nothing about Canadian Prohibition, so I'm assuming that they had a lot of the same problems that we had here about enforcing it, and you could probably get a drink fairly easily, but I really don't know much about it. Okay. Shortly after this, he's still out, waiting for his appeal, when the Chicago Crime Commission, it was like this independent body that investigates and writes about crime and lets the people know. They're kind of like the organization that's like releases a bunch of press releases about what's going on in Chicago and what they think people should know about to put the pressure on police to get these people out of there. Well, anyway, they release the public enemy list. And in that list is 28 people who they think are public enemies, people who should be taken off the streets. Number 1 on that list, Al Capone. Number 2 on that list, Bugs Moran, the rival to Al Capone. And number 3, Ralph Capone.
Wow.
Yeah, Ralph gets a big old number 3 on the list. So they thought he was something serious. His appeal doesn't go very well, and in November 1931, he gets sent to Leavenworth Prison in Kansas. Notably, he is the first Capone to spend time in federal prison. So
he's got that, huh?
Yeah, I mean, Al, more famous, but Al's not in prison yet. So Ralph beat him there. He was then transferred to McNeil Island Penitentiary, which is in Washington, and he finished out his sentence. He actually, believe it or not, served almost the entire sentence.
Wow.
Yes. Almost full 3 years.
They really didn't like this guy.
No, he didn't get out after 6 months or something. They really did it. He gets out. His second wife, Velma, files for divorce on the grounds of cruelty. The divorce is granted. Ralph is next subpoenaed as a witness in the tax trial of John Torrio, who again was his brother's mentor. He is served the paperwork at his place of employment, the Waukesha Water Company.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, this is his legitimate job, allegedly. Waukesha Water was accused of pushing its bottled water on taverns to purchase. An anonymous tavern owner said that he wasn't threatened by anyone from the company, but he considered purchasing their water a good idea just in case. In a future episode, we'll talk about Waukesha Water and Waukesha beer, because that will come back very soon. I mean, probably in the next 5 episodes.
So he's working in Waukesha, but
this is actually a Chicago thing. The headquarters might be Waukesha, but he's working out of Chicago.
Oh, okay, yeah. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. But here we go. Around 1940, and this is why it becomes relevant to this podcast, Around 1940, Ralph moves out of Chicago to Mercer, Wisconsin, and he lives in a cabin called Recap Lodge on Little Martha Lake. Mercer is way, 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 way up north. It's kind of near Hurley. It's kind of near Manitowish waters. It's really in the middle of nowhere. But if you're one of those people that likes the far Northwoods, you probably know where Mercer is. He managed Billy's Bar, which was in the Rex Hotel. He was generally believed to be the owner, but he did not put his name on anything for tax reasons, and he often would sign things with an alias R.C. James or R.J. Capper. Very clever nicknames. His business partner was Walter Crumdick, who actually did put his name on things, but authorities believed that he was using Walter to hide his assets.
I know, I've always heard that Al Capone had connections to Mercer, Wisconsin. Is it Ralph? Is Ralph that connection, or did he also have a place up in Mercer?
It would be Ralph.
Okay.
There's a lot of rumors and a lot of stories about Al Capone owning places or going to visiting places throughout northern Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
And most of those stories, I think, are BS or greatly exaggerated. But Ralph absolutely did invite people to his lodge. So was his brother there? Yeah, probably. Were a lot of other questionable characters there? Yeah, probably. So there's some truth. There's some truth to it. But I don't. And if somebody knows for sure and they want to correct me, please do. I mean, I'm not perfect. But I don't think that Al himself really owned much of anything in northern Wisconsin. I mean, he had better things to do. Throughout the 1940s, Ralph supported Wisconsin Assemblyman William Yeschek, believing that Yeschek would work to repeal the law banning slot machines. He thought, well, if we can get the slot machine ban taken away, then I can run slot machines legally. Yeschek was also in the resort business and Lac du Flambeau, so they were also kind of buddies just for that reason. That repeal did not come to pass. Slot machines did not become legal. And Ralph, upset about it, allegedly financially backed his opponent in the next race, and Yeschek was defeated. Coincidentally, and I'm going to say this with, a little bit of a conspiracy theory voice, but I don't believe this. Coincidentally, Yeschek died years later when his car went off the road and hit a tree.
So they got him out of office, and they're like, well, that just 3 years later, they're like, that wasn't enough. We need to off him. Was
it a bad day? Did he swerve to miss a deer? Probably something like that. But just leaving it out there. This guy fell out with Ralph Capone, and later he hit a tree. Do I believe anything bad happened? No, I don't, but just putting it out there.
Out of curiosity, was there like an investigation or anything, or was it
I have
pretty...
no idea.
Okay.
If there was, it wasn't like it made headlines or anything. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that somebody at least looked at it because, that's not a natural death. But no, it wasn't like anything suspicious about it.
Okay.
In September 1950, Ralph was summoned to appear in front of the Kefauver Senate Committee that was being held in Chicago. The Kefauver Committee in 1950-51 was investigating basically the mafia in interstate commerce. It was really the first time that the word mafia was really passed around on the national level. Most people didn't use that word, but this was right when TV was getting around. A lot of people had TVs. And these things were put on TV, and people were fascinated by this. They would watch these people go to Congress and testify. And today, I don't know if that would be exciting or not. But when you've got 2 TV channels watching mobsters testify in front of Congress, it's probably pretty cool.
Yeah.
When the papers to appear were served on him this time, Ralph was throwing a big party for Congressman Elvin Okonski. The Iron County District Attorney informed the marshal serving the papers that Capone, Ralph, was Okonski's right-hand man, and he, the DA, did not like Ralph very much. Ralph provided Kefauver nothing of value. Unlike our friend Sid Brodson, who you may remember once upon a time in a previous episode, the attorney who became a gambler, testified before the Kefauver committee and told them everything about how gambling works. Ralph was not like that. A detective with the Milwaukee Police Department, while off duty, saw Ralph in Milwaukee in January 1958. They saw him at the Ambassador Hotel and followed him to the Milwaukee airport. While at the airport, Ralph removed a package from a locker. The detective thought, I wonder if that's dope. But he was off duty, so he didn't do anything about it. Ralph entered the Milwaukee Police Department Detective Bureau in July 1958, so this is a little bit later. He wanted to complain to the captains of the Detective Bureau about being surveilled by the police. He said, "Hey, my only income comes from cigarette vending machines. The company is in Brookfield, Illinois. I'm not doing anything here in Milwaukee. Why do you guys keep following me around every time I come to town?" With Ralph, when he visited the police, was Joe Krasnow, a Milwaukee gambler and tavern operator who they knew very well because he was one of the biggest gamblers in Milwaukee in the 1940s. Not the guy you want to have standing next to you when you're saying you're doing nothing wrong. The police told Ralph, if you don't want a fatherly eye to follow you around, you should probably not go through Milwaukee the next time you're driving between Mercer and Chicago. 2 FBI agents were following Ralph shortly after this. Ralph and 2 other men arrived at the airport in an airplane that came from Ironwood, Michigan, which is right next to Hurley. They're basically the same city, but they're divided by a state border. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, those men entered a taxi cab with their luggage. They dropped their luggage off at the Ambassador Hotel. Apparently this is the place that Ralph likes to stay. And then they took the cab to the Milwaukee County Stadium to watch a Milwaukee Braves game. The FBI followed them all the way there, but the FBI did not watch the Braves game. So, whatever they did while there, whether they got hot dogs, I don't know. Nobody bothered to write that down. Ralph was back in Milwaukee again a couple months later, again because he wanted to watch the Milwaukee Braves. He was a big Braves fan, and guess what? This is 1958, and the Braves are in the World Series. They're in the World Series against the New York Yankees, of all teams. So he's going to catch as many games of this series as he can catch. Bad news, everybody. The Braves lost. The Yankees win the World Series. Ralph is back again, and he registers at the Ambassador Hotel, his preferred hotel, under the name R.C. James, along with a lady who is not his wife. The FBI believed that Ralph was just there visiting family, and he wasn't doing anything wrong, but they followed him anyway. An informant in Milwaukee met Ralph and a couple other guys at Tony and Dottie's bar in just outside of the city on Blue Mound, but had nothing interesting to report. They just enjoyed a dinner. The FBI asked the Milwaukee police about Ralph. Said, why does he keep coming back to Milwaukee? The police told them, well, Ralph, he's a troubleshooter for the Chicago outfit, so maybe he's here because he's, solving problems for Chicago. Or maybe he just really likes the Milwaukee Braves. You know how it is.
It's one of the two, right?
Yeah.
So I want to clarify this because maybe I missed, but other than this, so far, other than the whole importing, first of all, the importing liquor from Canada, do we know he did that, or was he just suspected of doing that?
He was never convicted of it, so it's not, I would say it's not proven.
Okay.
They had a pretty good idea, like they identified the pilot and everything, but he was never convicted, so we can't say 100% that it's true.
And at this point, like where we're at now, is he operating gambling machines?
Maybe.
Okay, so we don't really know but we do know at some point in time he did operate gambling machines. Right?
So just to be perfectly clear, the reason we're doing this is on our timeline. We're up to around 1958 in the podcast timeline. And this is around the time when Ralph is making repeated trips to Milwaukee. So that's why Ralph is coming up at this time. It's not that he's doing anything wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Like, at this point, he's just an old guy who runs a bar in northern Wisconsin and comes down to Milwaukee for baseball games. But, you know, he's Ralph Capone. So every time he comes to town, they're going to follow him around.
And I mean, they really do not have other than the fact that he's Al Capone's brother, they have no reason to follow this guy, right?
No.
I mean, has he even done anything wrong in Milwaukee?
No.
Okay.
Nothing. He's never been arrested in Milwaukee.
Okay, yeah, interesting.
Yeah. But they keep following him around. The FBI follows him. The police follow him. They talk to their informants, and the informants like, yeah, he's a member of the Mafia, which, you know, is true, but he's more or less retired at this point. But, you know, they still follow him around, and they say, and one of the informants says, you know, he's not even a rough guy. He's actually kind of a gentleman. So, you know, even the informants are like, you're wasting your time following this guy. Ralph lives out his last years in Mercer. That's where he spends, I mean, a good 20, almost 30 years of his life living in Mercer at Billy's Bar in the Rex Hotel. He makes a lot of friends. The local newspaper knows who he is. He's often using these fake names, but like it's not a big secret.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would occasionally like interview people and be like, hey, what's it like having Ralph Capone live in town? And every single person
It's like, he's
was
just
like, yeah, he's a nice guy. He's friendly to have around. No one ever says anything bad about him.
And that's the other thing. He never really gets in trouble for anything in Mercer either, correct?
No.
Okay.
No, not at all. So like during Prohibition, he's like considered the number 3 worst guy in Chicago. But after he goes to prison for taxes, he comes out, he moves up north, and he's pretty cool. But despite the fact that he's pretty cool, the FBI and the police keep track of him for over 30 years.
He never does anything wrong, and they still are following him around.
No, you do not want to be named Capone. They don't give up. The story ends in 1974. Ralph dies at a nursing home in Hurley, Wisconsin. A very non-exciting death for a big Chicago gangster. Dies of heart failure from heart disease. Not surprising. I mean, he's not super old, but he's in his 70s. His funeral is held in Hurley, Wisconsin. Another brother, John, attends. Al is very dead by this time. But John Capone is there. The district attorney of Iron County attends. Angelo Fazio of Milwaukee is there. And for those who don't recall, one of the nastiest guys in Milwaukee is Louis Fazio, and Angelo is his brother. But Angelo, as far as I know, is basically just a restaurant owner, not really known for being a shady guy. Of these 3, John Capone, Angelo Fazio, and the Iron County District Attorney, the worst of the 3 is the Iron County District Attorney. The man's name is Alex Ranieri, and within a decade of this funeral, he goes from being the district attorney to being the county judge, and he gets convicted and sent to prison for running houses of prostitution. Was Ralph involved in any of that? There's no evidence of that. It's not really a big secret that Hurley, Wisconsin has a very long history of a lot of prostitution for a very long time. But even though Ralph was, you know, hanging out in Mercer and Hurley, there's no evidence that he was involved in any of it, despite the fact that he was a mafia guy. So, is
there any known reason why this district attorney would have been there? Like, is there a connection between them?
I know of no connection. My guess is it's like we see from the earlier parts of the story that like he's a pretty good financial backer of a lot of candidates. So maybe they were friends because Ralph would help him fund like his campaign or something. But there's no connection as far as them like doing anything shady or anything. Okay.
And now repeatedly during this you refer to him as a gangster. Aww. So is there evidence?
Which is, you know, bad on me because he's not. He's an old retired guy, but that's the stigma he keeps for the rest of his life.
When he was in Chicago, do you think he was actually tied into the mafia, or was he just Al Capone's brother?
I think he was. It's hard to say because he's connected into the point where he's got this bottling operation. So, he's got that. He's allegedly flying in booze. He's making millions of dollars.
That's very true.
He's clearly doing something, but it's hard to say whether he's doing it by himself and Al doesn't care, because Al's obviously not going to be like, don't compete with me.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be like, you're my brother, do whatever. Or whether they were working together. Because Ralph is never really arrested with his brother or any of like the worst guys in Chicago. There's a couple guys who he's caught with when he's carrying these guns and stuff, but they're all fairly low-level guys. He's never like seen with like the big guys.
Right. And it's reasonable to assume, his brother is running the mafia. He's gonna come across these people and it was apparent that he wasn't estranged from his brother or anything like that.
No, they were perfectly friendly.
Yeah. So, he's gonna run into these people and, probably be friendly with them. Just by that relationship, while he might not have had anything to do with the mafia.
Yeah, so. And I'm gonna throw out a book plug here. It's not one of my books, but there's a book by Deirdre Capone, who is Ralph's granddaughter, and she has a book called Uncle Al Capone, because Al would be her great uncle. And even though I think some of what she says in there is, she paints too nice of a picture of Al. She doesn't tend to believe a lot of like the worst stories about him. So I disagree with her on that. She does have some really good stories in there about her grandfather, Ralph, and a lot of great photos. Mm-hmm. So if anybody wants to know more about Ralph, I strongly recommend it. I find her information on Al to be suspicious because when she met Al Capone, she was like 5 years old. So I don't think very highly of her opinion. No disrespect, Deirdre. I'm sorry. But, she's getting most of that secondhand. So, but because Ralph lived so much longer, I would tend to believe that she knew her grandfather a whole lot better.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So, I get no money for that. But if you're interested in this topic, that's the book to pick up.
What's a cool story? And I'm glad to hear the Mercer connection, to get the details of the Mercer connection, because I've always heard that for years. And,
yeah.
And so
I don't know if Mercer will come up again, but I guarantee you Hurley is going to come up again.
Good. Hurley,
we can talk about bear chasers. You ever been to
the bar?
The bear chasers?
Yeah, I've been to bear chasers, man. It's a nice bar.
It's a nice bar.
Yeah. So,
for those not familiar with Hurley, Bear Chasers is a bar. I don't even know if it's actually in Hurley.
I don't think it is, because it's just kind of out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, but you can take a boat up to it. It's a pretty cool bar, because if you're on the lake in Hurley, you take your boat and go to Bear Chasers.
And it's a super nice bar.
It is. It is very nice.
Yeah. So
that's our free plug for Bear Chasers.
We will take donations or a sponsorship.
Yeah.
Cool. I don't think I have anything else for this episode. You got anything more on those notes?
No, that's it for the notes. Yeah, this episode and probably the next few are going to be pretty straightforward. We're not going to have a lot of that convoluted stuff for a while. Just a lot of little pieces kind of fleshed out. This is a very loosely a Milwaukee story, but
I think
it connects.
I think that's a very good story, because it kind of brings together Chicago and Milwaukee and shows the overlap and stuff like that. And everybody likes to hear about a Capone.
Everybody likes the Capone story, and it's nice to hear how much time the FBI wastes following people around.
And you would have thought year 15 or something, they would have said, maybe we are wasting our time and would just direct themselves to something else.
Yeah. It's very strange.
I'm curious, have you seen the FBI file, Ralph?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is coming out of the FBI file. There wasn't something more that could have been in there that would lead them to just keep following them that we wouldn't know about? This isn't all pulled from just news articles or something?
No, It's not one of the more active files. Like, they're not giving you weekly updates or anything, but they never close it. Like, a lot of times what happens is they open a file on somebody, they do an investigation, they find it's a waste of time, and they'll close it 6 months later. That's fairly common. Ralph, even though they never caught him doing anything, that file just kind of stayed open.
And that probably explains why he moved up to Mercer. Because it was a place he could go to get away from that crap, you know?
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, because I'm pretty sure the FBI isn't going to follow somebody up to Mercer, Wisconsin.
No, not typically.
You know?
No.
And if they did, I mean, I think an FBI agent following somebody around in Mercer, Wisconsin would be pretty obvious because there's just nobody there. So
I'm not sure how the FBI operates up there. I mean, we're getting a little off here, but so, like, how the FBI works as far as like an office goes, their primary office is in Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. And then they have what's called resident agencies. So there's like a resident agency in Madison and in Kenosha. And I don't know if they still do. They probably still do. But they had one like in Appleton and Green Bay. And they're just these small, like, you know, strip mall offices where like 2 guys work there. Mm-hmm. But I have no idea. Like, maybe there's one in Wausau or something, but they don't have a guy, you know, up in the Northwoods.
You would think that if they have one in had one in Appleton, they would probably have one in Wausau too.
Yeah, I would be willing to bet they have one in Wausau, but I'm guessing that's it. Unless that guy in Wausau is specifically called to go look at something, he's not driving up to the Michigan border. Mm-hmm. You know, he's got better things to do with his day.
And the other thing about this, too, is how did the FBI and the police catch wind? Like, if this guy was just going down to Milwaukee for a Braves game, how did they catch wind that he's in town so fast to be able to follow him around?
That's a really good question.
You know?
I don't know.
God, it almost makes you think, like, were they following them around in Mercer? Or something?
I don't think they were following him around in Mercer, but... you raise a good point. I mean, they seemed to find out pretty fast when he was in town.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a good question.
You know, like if he was hanging out in town for a week, I could see him eventually catching wind of it.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I don't know. My guess would be an informant. Like a lot of again, we're going off here, but with the FBI, they have like their regular informants. These are like guys who are criminals, but they also provide information, and they get paid to do that. So pretty sweet deal. But then they have also what are just called CIs, which is confidential informant, but it's not like the same thing as like what we normally think of as an informant. And these are people that are just like not placed, like the FBI doesn't put them there, but like say for example, the guy who works the front desk at the Ambassador Hotel. If the FBI is like, hey, if anybody like that you know is like a suspicious dude comes in, give us a heads up.
Yeah.
And they're not going to pay that guy for that. But that guy's going to be like, well, the FBI asked me to, and I want to be a good citizen, so I'll give him a call.
Yeah, and that's a very good point.
So they had a lot of people like that, people who were like receptionists at a doctor's office, things like that, where, you know, you wouldn't think of them as informants, but they were just these random people who would let you know when somebody was coming around.
And it could be that he commonly, whenever he went down to Milwaukee, he would visit somebody that the police had eyes on. So as soon as he went and visited that guy, they now knew, okay, he's in town.
Right.
Or something like
right.
that.
And I'm saying, like, the reason I use that example is every time he's staying in Milwaukee or he's staying at the Ambassador Hotel.
Yeah.
So do I know that? No, absolutely I don't. But maybe that's how they know. Maybe sometimes he stays at the Pfister, and the guy at the Pfister doesn't bother to call the FBI.
Yeah. So, like, how many more times was he in Milwaukee, and maybe they didn't even know because he didn't stay at the Ambassador, or he stayed with a friend or something like that.
Right, exactly.
Could very well be.
Yeah.
But
I don't know.
And I also think, I mean, I recognize the Ambassador, so I'm wondering if the Ambassador has come up in other stories. So maybe that...
No, well, maybe it did, but I'll tell you why you know what the Ambassador is.
Okay. Why do I know what the Ambassador is?
You ever been to the rave?
Yeah.
It's across the street.
Oh, so maybe...
It's got big red lights that say Ambassador on top of the roof.
Yeah, okay. All right. So maybe it just, like, jumps into my head from that. But
If you've been to the rave, you've seen it because it's got
It's a
big
thing.
lights on the ceiling. Or not the ceiling, the roof.
so it still exists, huh?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Maybe we should go stay there sometime. Maybe we should do a podcast from the ambassador.
from the ambassador. Yeah,
You
maybe.
should have done this one from the ambassador.
I've never been in the ambassador, but I have to guess it's not the greatest hotel.
We're gonna have to look up and see how much it costs. after
No
that.
disrespect to the ambassador, but that part of town is not the greatest.
So, all right. Well, we will wrap this one up. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast player. And Gavin, do your thing.
Yeah, if anybody wants to reach out for whatever reason, if you have questions, comments, you think this was great, you think this was terrible, you can email me, MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com. You can go to MilwaukeeMafia.com. Best damn website for Mafia information on the internet, with a very beautiful wiki that keeps growing. And or Facebook. You go to Facebook.com/Milwaukee Mafia, and that's updated a couple times a week. So lots of places you can find me. And if you want to find Eric, you go through me.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll be back. Don't forget about the Patreon. So we will be back with a Patreon episode next week. So please, if you're not subscribed, jump over there and jump over to MilwaukeeMafia.com and subscribe. And otherwise, we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Thanks for tuning in.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in to the Milwaukee Mafia Podcast. Join us next time for another look back at Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.